The confrontation between Dan Goldman, Kash Patel, and the FBI over the Epstein files quickly turned into a moment no one saw coming. There was no shouting, no dramatic outbursts. Instead, the tension surfaced in the most understated way possible through a straightforward question that should have required a straightforward answer. Goldman simply asked whether Donald Trump's name appears anywhere in the Epstein files. The instant the question was spoken, the tone inside the committee room shifted. Patel hesitated. He claimed he couldn't hear the question. And in that pause, the calm atmosphere fractured. Goldman was recognized and repeated himself clearly. He asked again whether Donald Trump appears anywhere in the Epstein files. Patel responded by saying it wasn't a complicated question, he just hadn't heard it. Then came the answer, delivered carefully. Patel stated that all references to President Trump, along with everyone else, had already been released to the extent the law allows. That response immediately triggered a deeper line of questioning. Goldman pressed him on what legal barriers he was referring to. He specifically asked whether Patel meant court orders that prohibit the release of grand jury material under Rule 6E. Patel acknowledged that Rule 6E was part of it, but insisted there were additional restrictions as well. Goldman didn't let that stand. He asked Patel to identify what other evidence beyond grand jury material those court orders supposedly prevented from being released. Patel replied that some information was collected through search warrants and subject to limitations. Goldman pushed back, stating plainly that those claims did not match the language of the court orders and were not covered under Rule 6E. The exchange tightened. Patel insisted there were sealed court orders and protective orders in place. Goldman countered that those materials had already been unsealed during discovery and provided to Ghislaine Maxwell. Patel rejected that assertion outright. Goldman replied that they could argue about it all day, but the facts didn't change. Then Goldman reframed the issue. He asked directly whether Patel's testimony was that the FBI was withholding all videos and images, despite acknowledging that agents had reviewed thousands of hours of material because a court order required them to stay sealed. Patel responded quickly, saying he never claimed that about the videos. He explained that the vast majority of the seized material consisted of pornographic content downloaded from the internet, including child sexual abuse material, and that none of that would ever be released. Goldman agreed that victim material should never be made public. But he wasn't talking about that. He clarified that if there are videos or photographs involving third parties Epstein trafficked to powerful individuals, public figures or people with influence, those are materials the FBI does control and could legally release. And that was the moment where the exchange stopped being about technical, legal language and became about accountability. Because the question wasn't whether victims should be protected. Everyone agreed on that. The question was whether the government is using victim protection as a blanket justification to withhold information that could expose powerful people who were never charged, never named, and never held accountable. That silence, and the careful wording that followed, is what made this exchange resonate far beyond the hearing room. Goldman pressed even harder. If this material exists, he asked, why hasn't it been released? Why are you treating this as a settled fact when, from his perspective, it isn't true at all? He wanted a direct answer. Was Patel really saying that none of the videos relate to Epstein's trafficking operation in any meaningful way? Patel responded by stating that every video collected under the original search warrants had been reviewed over the past decade. According to him, every single piece of video evidence was examined and used in whatever prosecutions could legally be brought. Nothing, he said, was ignored or overlooked. Goldman immediately clarified that prosecutions weren't what he was asking about. His question was about disclosure. Why, he asked, has the FBI not released the full Epstein files, including the names of people connected to the sex trafficking network, something Patel had promised before becoming FBI director? Patel replied that he would not release downloaded pornographic material. Goldman cut him off. That wasn't the issue. He wasn't asking about explicit content or victim material. He wanted everything else. Other files, other evidence, other documentation. What exists beyond that? Goldman pressed for specifics. Patel insisted that what had been gathered through the search warrants represented the entirety of what the FBI possessed. Goldman wasn't satisfied. He narrowed the question even further. Within that collection, he asked, "Is there truly nothing that connects any other individuals to Epstein's underage sex trafficking?" Patel answered that, to his knowledge, there was not. Goldman paused, then moved to another category of evidence witness interviews. FBI 302 forms. He pointed out that these interview summaries are not grand jury testimony. They are not automatically sealed. They are not covered by Rule 6E. So why, he asked, are those documents not being released with victim names properly redacted? Patel replied with a familiar refrain. The FBI is releasing everything it is legally permitted to release. Goldman challenged that answer directly. How? He asked. Is that not legally allowed? What law is stopping it? Patel pushed back, asking whether Goldman understood how court orders and protective orders work. Goldman responded sharply. He reminded Patel that he had been a real prosecutor for 10 years. He knew exactly how protective orders function. And that's precisely why he was asking the question. Goldman made the issue explicit. What court order, he asked, prevents the release of FBI witness statements? If those statements were ever covered by a protective order, that order no longer applies. So why are the documents still being withheld? Patel claimed that when a court issues a protective order or seals material, it remains sealed unless the court says otherwise. Goldman wasn't letting him change the subject. That wasn't his question. His question was why the DOJ hasn't gone back to court just as it did with grand jury. Material to request unsealing of those witness statements. Patel said the Department of Justice did go to the court. Goldman corrected him. Not for those records? Not for the witness interviews? So why not? Before Patel could answer, the gavel came down. The chair announced that Goldman's time had expired, and just like that, the exchange ended not with clarity, but with unanswered questions hanging in the air. Questions about what exists, what's being withheld, and why the government appears willing to fight harder to keep information sealed than to explain its decisions to the public. The tension finally spilled over when Goldman said it outright. He accused Patel of hiding the Epstein files. Before the accusation could fully land, the chair cut him off. The time of the gentleman has expired. But the words were already out there. You are part of the cover-up. Patel immediately asked to respond. He was allowed to speak, and he forcefully denied the accusation. He said any claim that he was involved in covering up child sex trafficking or protecting offenders was completely false. He insisted that his work showed the opposite. Goldman fired back one last time, pointing out that victims had repeatedly tried to contact Patel and had not received responses. That exchange ended there, but the damage was done. Anyone watching live could feel it. Something had cracked open in that room. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was hesitation, clear, visible, and deeply uncomfortable. Goldman had asked the same question more than once, slowly and clearly. Each time, Patel's answers sounded rehearsed, as if they had been prepared in advance rather than shaped by the question itself. Patel kept repeating the same claim. Everything that could legally be released had already been made public. All credible information involving Donald Trump and anyone else was supposedly out there already. But that word credible stood out. Because credibility isn't determined by the public. It's determined by the agencies that control the files. And the moment Patel used that term, it raised a red flag. It suggested discretion, not transparency. Goldman immediately pushed past the surface explanation and focused on the law. He questioned Patel about Rule 6E, about sealed search warrants, about protective orders, and about what actually prevents disclosure. Patel argued that various court orders still restricted release. Goldman, drawing on his decade as a federal prosecutor, dismantled that claim piece by piece. He pointed out that many of the documents Patel referenced had already been unsealed during the Ghislaine Maxwell proceedings. The atmosphere grew heavier with every exchange. Either Patel didn't fully grasp which records were still protected, or he was deliberately avoiding precise answers. Each time Goldman asked for a specific legal justification, Patel's responses looped back to generalities. And with every vague explanation, Goldman's frustration became sharper and more direct. What started as a standard oversight hearing turned into a confrontation. One side was demanding clear answers. The other was deflecting, repeating legal language without resolving the contradictions. Then the focus shifted to the video evidence. For years, the public has speculated about what was recovered from Epstein's properties. Patel stated flatly that most of the footage consisted of explicit material downloaded from the internet, including child sexual abuse content that could never and should never be released. On that point, there was no disagreement. Protecting victims is not optional, but Goldman wasn't asking about that material. He was asking about everything else. Footage that could reveal who visited Epstein, who interacted with him, who may have been part of the broader network. Patel responded with absolute certainty. He said none of the videos, none at all, contained evidence relevant to other participants in Epstein's crimes. That level of certainty collided with years of public questions, unanswered leads, and incomplete disclosures. And in that collision, the hearing stopped being about procedure and started being about trust. For years, journalists, former investigators, and people close to the case have spoken about recordings Epstein allegedly kept involving powerful figures. None of those claims have ever been proven, and they remain unverified. But they've circulated long enough to create a public expectation that somewhere, buried deep in government archives, there may be unanswered truths still locked away. That's why Patel's blanket denial didn't calm suspicion. It intensified it. The real rupture came when Goldman shifted away from videos and focused on witness interviews, specifically F-302s. The formal records of interviews conducted during criminal investigations. These documents are not grand jury testimony. They are not governed by Rule 6E. They are not automatically sealed. They remain confidential only if a valid protective order is in place. And in the Epstein-Maxwell proceedings, those protective orders have already expired or been lifted. So, Goldman asked the obvious question, why haven't those interview summaries been released with victim names redacted? Patel again claimed they were restricted. Goldman pressed harder, asking why the FBI had not gone back to court to unseal them, just as it had done with the grand jury materials. Patel responded vaguely, saying the DOJ had gone to the court. Goldman corrected him immediately. Not for these records. That moment exposed something more serious than procedural confusion. It suggested selective transparency, conscious decision about which materials remain hidden and which are allowed into public view for the first time. Patel appeared visibly irritated. He asked Goldman whether he understood how protective orders work. Goldman didn't hesitate. I was a prosecutor for 10 years, he said. I know exactly how they work. It wasn't posturing. It was a signal. He recognized when legal language was being used as a shield rather than an explanation. And Patel's answers were no longer holding together. The chair cut off the exchange. But Goldman's final statement lingered in the room. You are hiding the Epstein files. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize it. He said it plainly, and that restraint made it land harder, because that sentence echoed what many Americans have felt for years, that the full truth of the Epstein case has never been disclosed, and that the very institutions charged with transparency are the ones slowing it down. This hearing was never just about Epstein. It was about trust, whether the system is capable of confronting its own failures without managing the narrative. The Epstein case isn't merely a criminal investigation. It represents a web of influence that thrived in the shadows while accountability bent around power. And every time officials insist the public has been told everything while refusing to release basic, non-sensitive records, that trust erodes even further. That wound keeps reopening. And people aren't angry because of rumors or internet speculation. They're angry because secrecy has become the default. After decades of investigations, arrests, plea deals, document dumps, and sealed records, the Epstein story still feels unresolved. Every new release creates more questions than answers. Every heavy redaction feels intentional. Every legal justification sounds less like protection and more like delay. And hearings like this don't calm the situation, they intensify it. When Patel says that everything credible has already been released, the public hears something very different. They hear that credibility is being defined behind closed doors. They hear that what counts as credible depends on who might be embarrassed or whose reputation could take a hit. They hear that the people holding the files are also deciding which truths are safe enough for public view. That's why the Epstein files have grown into something bigger than a single criminal case. They've become a symbol of institutional opacity, a symbol of how powerful systems respond when transparency becomes inconvenient. When answers turn vague and records remain locked away, trust erodes. And when trust collapses, speculation rushes in to fill the vacuum. You don't have to believe every theory online to recognize the pattern. All you have to do is watch what happens when a straightforward question causes the FBI director to pause, redirect, and retreat behind layered explanations. That hesitation speaks louder than any leaked memo ever could. The core issue goes far beyond one individual's name appearing in a file. It's about whether influential networks are shielded from full accountability. It's about whether institutions instinctively choose secrecy over openness. It's about whether transparency is a real commitment or just a public relations strategy. Dan Goldman didn't tear the system apart in that moment, but he exposed its stress points. He showed where the tension lives. And he made it unmistakably clear that the fight for disclosure is far from finished. The Epstein case will continue to haunt the country until every layer is brought into the light. Not fragments, not selective releases, not documents blacked out until they're unreadable. The full record, the interviews, the timelines, the decisions, the unanswered questions. The public isn't asking for graphic material. They're not demanding victims be exposed. What they want is clarity. What they want is verifiable information. What they want is the truth that institutions have kept just beyond reach for years, and hearings like this prove one thing clearly: pressure works. Not instantly, not cleanly, but gradually. Every confrontation forces more transparency. Every question pushes the boundary. Every moment of hesitation tells the public exactly where scrutiny needs to stay focused. If you believe transparency matters, if you want the full truth instead of managed silence, make sure to subscribe, hit like, and stay connected. This story isn't over, and the next hearing could be the one that finally forces the rest of the Epstein files into the open.